Coming up, we're putting music's greatest legends on trial, counting down the most insane musical courtroom dramas in history, and we're giving you the verdicts. Now, I guarantee you know about these famous lawsuits, but you've never heard the true stories of them, and they're going to blow your mind. Like the rapper who clearly ripped off his #1 hit from two legendary artists, but did you know that by ripping them off, he actually made the song 10 times bigger, and then he actually turned around and bought the full copyright of the song because it was cheaper than the legal fees. So he makes money off the ripoff and the original. Plus, there's a legendary rocker who was sued because parents claimed his song caused the death of their son. Few people claim that, but the song was actually completely misunderstood. But they tried to get him brought up on charges of manslaughter. And then there's a legend who was sued for ripping off his own song. Let's do it. Hey, music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. Famous musician legal battles, you know, they're like the fiery wreck on the side of the road. You want to look away, but you find yourself rubbernecking, you just can't. Today we got our eyes glued to the scene as we cover some formidable rock bands. Some of the players include giants like Queen, there's Ozzy Osbourne, Led Zeppelin, and a former Beatle. Be on the lookout for performances from the witness stand, blatantly ripped off riffs, and surprisingly, multiple Wayne's World references, if you can believe that. You never know what you're going to get in these stories, but let's get into our first one. So coming in at number 5, we're going to count them down actually. It's from the year 1985. Truly one of the craziest lawsuits in music history. Fogerty versus Fantasy Inc. It was a matchup that pitted former Creedence Clearwater Revival frontman John Fogerty against himself. Or more specifically, John Fogerty was sued for sounding too much like John Fogerty. Let me explain. In 1985, Fogerty, one-time frontman of Creedence Clearwater Revival, released his third solo album, Centerfield. Lead single from the record was a song called The Old Man Down the Road.
The old man is down the road.
That track reached number 10 on the Billboard Hot 100. It was a bona fide comeback hit from the swamp rocker. I mean, John Fogerty had been sidelined from the music industry since the 70s, thanks to ongoing legal disputes with the CCR label Fantasy Records. The Old Man Down the Road signified a long-awaited moment of victory for John Fogerty, who hadn't had a top 10 hit in something like 14 years. I mean, not since his days with Creedence. It had been a long time coming. He hadn't released a solo album since 1975. But problems started to arise for John when Fantasy Records and label owner Sal Zanes came sniffing around. The Old Man Down the Road instigated a copyright infringement suit, claimed that the song was essentially the same as CCR's 1970 hit Run Through the Jungle, as a song that they owned the copyright to. It didn't matter that John had written both of these songs.
Better run through the jungle. You got to hide it, hide.
I mean, if Fantasy could convince a jury that there was no meaningful difference between the two tracks, they could erase Fogerty's authorship for Old Man and cash in on this track, on this big comeback hit. This would also establish a devastating precedent for musicians. It would mean that songwriters could not claim to have their own style of music. If one guy could own another guy's artistic style, not only would that be morally wrong, it would also cripple artists financially and really stifle their creativity. It was a big one. On the witness stand, John Fogerty played sections of both of these songs, illustrating that each was an entirely different work formed out of his signature swamp-style rock. To illustrate this, Fogerty pulled out his Washburn guitar and plugged it into a little amp. It was a performance that would determine the future of his career, and really many careers. Every single note was under the microscope that day. There was no room for error. At the conclusion of his courtroom performance, though, Fogerty explained that even though there were similarities between these songs, he had invented something new that you would expect him to play. I mean, can you fault Elvis for sounding like Elvis or Prince for sounding like himself from record to record? Musicians all have their signature styles. This was his point. Old Man Down the Road, that fell under John Fogerty's. After deliberating, the 6-member jury came out in favor of Mr. John Fogerty. They were convinced that there were important differences between the two songs and similarities that could reasonably fall under Fogerty's style. However, even though John won the case, he actually racked up over $1 million in legal fees in the process. So seeking reimbursement, he had to prove that Fantasy's lawsuit was made in bad faith. But the judge, he refused to hold Fantasy responsible for this cost, the cost of defending himself. And so Fogerty appealed all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. And after quite a while, he won 9 votes to 0, and he was awarded his attorney fees. So coming in at number 4, we got a former Beatle with his breakout solo hit. From his 1970 triple album, All Things Must Pass, it's George Harrison with My Sweet Lord. Or, if you ask the Chiffons, a reworking of their song, He's So Fine.
My sweet Lord, do-lang, he's so fine. Do-lang.
So released on November 23rd, 1970, My Sweet Lord became a worldwide sensation, going to number 1 in no less than 16 countries. Here in America, it went to number 1 on both the Billboard Hot 100 and the U.S. Cashbox chart. And notably, it was also the first number 1 by a former Beatle, after the breakup. However, the album and the song's success, it was soon overshadowed by an extended lawsuit drilling down on the similarities between My Sweet Lord and He's So Fine.
Wait to be held in his arms if I were a queen. My sweet Lord.
Written by Ronnie Mack, He's So Fine was recorded by the Chiffons and issued as a single back in December of 1962. Of course, the song was likewise a big hit. It went to number 1 on the Hot 100 in 1963. Also went to number 1 in the R&B charts. The lawsuit, that was instigated against Harrison on February 10th, 1971 by Bright Tunes Music Corporation. They owned the copyright for He's So Fine. That was less than 3 months after the song's release. So the claim was plagiarism. Said Harrison in his biography, "I wasn't consciously aware of the similarity to He's So Fine. It would have been very easy to change a note here or there and not affect the feeling of the record." George Harrison tried to settle with Bright Tunes out of court, but the publishing house, they were set on owning My Sweet Lord outright. It'd be a massive paycheck for them. So actually, the case didn't go to trial until February of 1976, long after the song hit number 1. And both songs were scrutinized in agonizing detail. Judge Richard Owen of the U.S. District Court in Manhattan ruled that Harrison did not deliberately steal the song's melody, but that he subconsciously used it. And he said, and I quote, "It is clear that My Sweet Lord is the very same song as He's So Fine. This is, under the law of infringement of copyright, and is no less so, even though subconsciously accomplished." Yeah. So Harrison was ordered to pay $1.6 million in damages. About a year before that, in 1975, the Chiffons actually recorded their own version of My Sweet Lord. They were looking to capitalize on the lawsuit's publicity. It's during the lawsuit, they recorded their own version, a rare cover of a ripped-off version of your own song. Yeah, in essence, the Chiffons were covering themselves in a way. You don't hear too many of those.
Oh, my sweet Lord.
George Harrison, for his part, released a single called This Song in November of '76 as a reaction to the suit. That one went to number 25 in the U.S. Hot 100. Later, in an even weirder twist, though, Harrison was granted ownership of Bright Tunes, which meant that not only was My Sweet Lord his again, but also so was He's So Fine. So that puts My Sweet Lord in the even rarer category of an artist who subconsciously ripped off a song that formerly wasn't his but would be in the future. Very complicated. Said George Harrison about it, "After 20 years, eventually the judge awarded the song to me. And the money that had been taken for My Sweet Lord, and I suddenly end up with He's So Fine. What a crazy turn of events." So coming in at number 3, this is a tough one. It's a tragic suit where there really were no winners. On October 26, 1984, 19-year-old Ozzy Osbourne fan John McCollum took his own life while lying on his bed listening to one of Ozzy's records. The headphones were still on his head when he was found, actually. According to a police report, Blizzard of Oz was on McCollum's turntable, and it was cued to side 1, which features the case's track in question, Suicide Solution. His As any parent would be, John's mother and father were devastated. And your heart has to go out to him, even if what happened next was completely ludicrous. And the McCollums blamed John's death on Osbourne's song Suicide Solution, alleging that the lyrics played a crucial role of what transpired. John's father called his son a perfectly normal kid who didn't show any signs of any depression at all. He said one moment he was happy and the next thing they knew, he was gone. He was dead. Nobody could explain it. The only thing we know is he was listening to this music, is what he said. Also, John's mother added, "There's not a day that goes by that I don't think about him, and I just kept saying, why? What was the reason? You know, he was fine." And then my daughter, I was talking to her and I said, "Why did he kill himself?" She said, "It was the music he listened to, Mom." Convinced that the music was a reason they had lost their son, this family filed a suit against Ozzy Osbourne and CBS Records in 1986. It was the only explanation they could come up with. Citing the lyrics, which included "Made your bed, rest your head, but you lie there and moan, where to hide," the parents were convinced Ozzy pushed their son over the edge. Osbourne, for his part, insisted that the teen had misinterpreted the track's meaning. The singer said the lyrics described the song's solution as a liquid, as in liquid solution, not a way out of life. It was actually about the perils of alcoholism, something which Ozzy was all too familiar with. He said alcohol will kill you, just like any other drug will. It's just a terrible case of misinterpretation. If the McCollums won the lawsuit, it would have massive consequences, though. I mean, not only for the music industry, but for all forms of media. I mean, TV shows, movies, music videos, and books could all be held responsible for the actions of those who interacted with them. It could set a terrible and dangerous precedent, taking the conversation and interpretation out of art, and relegating it to promotional mechanism. The suit was filed in January of '86, but it was actually thrown out the following August. At the court hearing, entertainment lawyer Howard Weitzman, he told the judge if they were going to hold Ozzy responsible for John McCollum's death, then they would have to add William Shakespeare to the list of villains. I mean, how many millions of kids in English class read Romeo and Juliet every single year? The tragedy romanticizes the notion of suicide like few others, and yet it is, it's a classic. Weitzman argued that Suicide Solution's lyrics were protected by the right of free speech in America, and the judge, he agreed, although it was very clear that he was not an Ozzy Osbourne fan. In his verdict, he said that although Ozzy was totally objectionable and repulsive, trash can be given First Amendment protection too. A little harsh there. So coming in at number 2, watch this.
Little bitty change. It's not the same.
It's not the same. This is what Vanilla Ice said when he was grilled about ripping off Queen and David Bowie's Under Pressure.
Ding, ding, ding. There's Ghost.
And that's where we're going for our 4th lawsuit today. Queen/David Bowie versus Vanilla Ice. It's one of the most famous bass lines in history, no doubt about it. And up until 1990, whenever people heard it, they were singing that iconic first line, "Pressure, pushing down on me." And after 1990, all right, stop, collaborate, and listen.
Ice, ice, baby. All right, stop, collaborate, and listen.
Those were the words that a lot of people were saying. In the rising generation at the time, there were more than a few who didn't know who Queen or David Bowie were, well, outside of Labyrinth.
Magic dance, magic dance.
When you think about it, it's true. 1990, when Ice Ice Baby hit number 1, I mean, there was an entire generation that had never heard this song under the age of 18, and they think of Ice Ice Baby. It's a crazy world. And, Queen and David Bowie in 1990 hadn't had a hit in a few years. This was, of course, before Wayne's World. But before that iconic Wayne's World Bohemian Rhapsody breakthrough moment in 1992, there was Vanilla Ice teaching the kids a little something about Queen and David Bowie, even if he didn't mean to. But let's go back to the origins of Under Pressure for a minute. There are diverging accounts of who is actually responsible for this iconic and irresistible riff. Queen's bassist John Deacon attributed it to David Bowie. However, Bowie claimed the bass line was already being worked on when he arrived at the studio. But accounts converge around the fact that even Deacon had repeatedly played the riff throughout the songwriting sessions. But then he completely forgot how to play it after the guys took a dinner break. He forgot it. Reportedly, it was drummer Roger Taylor who came to the rescue and showed Deacon how to play it again so they wouldn't forget it. Under Pressure was nowhere near as big of a hit as it should have been here in America. When it was released in '81, it stalled at number 29 on the Hot 100. I mean, that's criminal. Speaking of criminal, for better or worse, burgeoning rap artist Robert Van Winkle, aka Vanilla Ice, put his own spin on the song just 9 years later. Blown away by Under Pressure when he heard it, he blatantly stole his bass riff for his 1990 breakout hit, Ice Ice Baby. Ice defended his sample famously, insisting that the two melodies were distinct because he added a beat between notes. Not long after its release, so Ice Ice Baby was on its way to becoming a high-profile court case, one that was destined to be an embarrassing loss for this rapper. Representatives for Queen and Bowie threatened a copyright infringement suit, and they were pointing out the obvious. We all knew it. Vanilla Ice's sample sounded exactly the same as Under Pressure. And since he hadn't asked for permission to use it, Ice was going down hard on this one. I mean, it was a slam dunk. Queen and Bowie knew it. Vanilla Ice knew it. We all knew it. So it's no surprise that the two parties settled matters outside of court for an undisclosed sum. Vanilla Ice later revealed that buying the copyright to the song was actually cheaper than fighting the case in court. Wow. So coming in at number 1 for our last lawsuit, we're going with the mother of all music lawsuits because of the band and the song involved, and really the most Googled of all of these. It's the mighty Led Zeppelin, who's of course no stranger to plagiarism claims. Some more credible than others, but maybe that's a subject for a future installment. For this episode though, I want to zero in on a suit centered on the band's most iconic track, probably the biggest classic rock song ever, Stairway to Heaven.
The stairway to heaven.
Instigated by representatives of Spirit guitarist and singer Randy California, in May 2014, a complaint of plagiarism was filed against Zeppelin by the Randy Craig Wolf Trust in lieu of Randy California. He actually passed away in 1997. The Trust accused Jimmy Page of plagiarizing the song Taurus, a track on the group's 1968 debut album Spirit. So I guess a year before his passing, Randy expressed his anger towards Stairway to Heaven, saying, and I quote, "The guys made millions of bucks on it and never said thank you. They never said, can we pay you some money for it? It's kind of a sore point with me. Maybe someday their conscience will make them do something about it." End of quote. So the accusations were brought forward by Trust rep Michael Skidmore, who claimed that Plant and Page had stolen a few notes from Taurus for Stairway's famous opening riff, which are incidentally some of the most recognizable notes in popular music history in their own right.
Hey!
That's right, 2 Wayne's World references in one episode. Don't tempt me to do a third. Anyway, there was an argument to be made that seems Randy California was onto something. Not only is it true that the descending chromatic motif that Page plays in Stairway strongly resembles Taurus, but there are other anecdotal connections, you know. The two bands shared the same billing at the end of 1968 and the beginning of 1969. That much is known. Robert Plant has admitted to liking the band, and Page owns some of Spirit's albums in his record collection, though he would later claim that he had never heard Taurus prior to the lawsuit. That all being said, the allegations brought against Jimmy Page were nowhere near rock solid. I mean, the Taurus motif is not exactly an uncommon chord progression. It's been used in traditional and popular music going way back. During the trial, lawyers and music experts on both sides pulled out all the stops, bringing forward every kind of musical example that they could think of. Francis Malafy, the prosecuting attorney, even went as far as to accuse Jimmy Page of copying Mary Poppins' famous song Chim Chim Cheree.
Chim chimney, chim chimney, chim chim cheree.
There was also talk of musical tradition going back to the 17th century. However, overwhelming evidence was presented in the form of two particular songs. First, guitarist Davy Graham's 1959 adaptation of Arthur Hamilton's Crimea River. And To Catch a Shad, a traditional song recorded by the Modern Folk Quartet in 1963. Each tune featured the same descending chromatic scale that Stairway used, but the clincher was that both were recorded years before Spirit recorded Taurus. This made it nearly impossible to prove that Jimmy Page had specifically plagiarized Randy California. On June 23, 2016, the court found in Jimmy Page's favor. However, it would once again be reopened in 2018 after the U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals determined the previous judge had made multiple errors in the original trial. Irregardless, the 2018 jury upheld the original verdict, stating that the two tracks were not intrinsically similar. So there you have it. 5 insane music lawsuits and their verdicts and their impact on our culture, insane. So what do you think? Did the courts get each of these cases right? Or should any of these verdicts, should they have been reversed? Give us your take in the comments below. Let's have a great discussion. What do you think about George Harrison? They sound so, it's just crazy because everybody takes from everybody. Time. 3 chords and the truth, my friends.